Look. Pay close attention. As you observe the image in front of you, never lose sight of the fact that it is a representation on a screen derived from a video, derived from a compression algorithm, derived from a matrix of mathematical manipulations, from light hitting a digital sensor in a camera, positioned and placed by one or more people with deliberate choice. The image is captured, edited, stored, and presented back to you with purpose and intent, and the means of every stage of that process shapes the manner in which you receive it now. This is as true when you are watching a film as it is when you are watching a TV show, as it is when you are watching a painting on a wall, as it is when you are watching me now. Everything from my surroundings to my manner of address shapes how you receive my argument. So as you watch my review, bear in mind the presentation and juxtaposition of images and words in sequence. I am trying to persuade you, and I am trying to manipulate you, and every other video you watch does the same. Video is not a whole opening into another reality. It is representation, spectacle, image, and memory. So I'm going to tell you a story about a happy little dog who learned how to play soccer. A soccer-playing dog. A soccer dog. A dog so good at soccer, he got sent to Europe to compete in a European Soccer Cup. This happy soccer-playing dog is of course the transatlantic soccer-playing dog of soccer-based dog sequel Soccer Dog 2 European Cup. Now, Soccer Dog 2 European Cup isn't the best made film. It's not the smartest film, it's not the funniest film, it's not the most snappily edited film, it's not the best cast film, it's not the best acted film, it wasn't a very successful film, and it sadly spelled the end of the Soccer Dog cinematic universe. But what Soccer Dog 2 European Cup is a very enjoyable film. Lots of people spent time and effort making Soccer Dog 2 European Cup, and they believed in that soccer-playing dog movie, and they wanted it to be good, and that shines out of the film like a spotlight. Anyone can enjoy Soccer Dog 2 European Cup, and anyone can enjoy Warner Bros. 2016 superhero-based action comedy Suicide Squad. So, I'm not here to talk about the characterization, the plotting, or the acting of the film Suicide Squad. In almost all big-budget films, technical qualities like these are of a fixed, professional level, which does not merit comment, and what comment it receives is most often pseudo-intellectual sophistry. Lots and lots of film reviews attempt to talk at length about inferences on these qualities, which the reviewers are ultimately unqualified to make. People desperately want to be able to say, this is good or bad because, or these elements are naturally a poor mix because, or some other contortion of logic to determine what makes a good film distinct from a bad film. But there is no law of cinema, or of art more widely, that can't have some egregious exception pointed to, and there's no such thing as the exception that proves the rule. In fact, exceptions are the definition of disproving rules. So, when Stanley Kubrick is said to have broken the 180-degree rule in his masterpiece The Shining, our first reaction should be to wonder exactly what that rule was doing for us in the first place.
I'm sorry to differ with you, sir. But you are the caretaker.
For this review, I've cheated a little and done something a YouTube reviewer isn't meant to do. I've gone away and read a book, and reading a technical work about the mechanics of cinema like The Eye is Faster here, you really get a sense for what the rules are and aren't. The rules of cinema, in the sense that you might sit in a video and say, oh, the film was bad because it didn't follow this rule, are more like standard tools or standard chords. And like standard tools or chords, when you use them in ways they aren't meant to be used, what you get back isn't broken, it's just different. But around cinema and in the torrent of video essays that by now must be considered to be the most popular school of film theory, amongst people likely to say they're interested in film theory, we've now built an edifice of critical sounding words and concepts that are at best useful analogies for a thing you might like to do in film, like providing, and I hate this phrase, character beats, and at worst are just nonsensical sophistry designed to back moral arguments with technical ones and technical arguments with moral ones, because it's not okay to like good things made by bad people or dislike bad things made by good people.
He looked like a monster, so they treated him like a monster.
This results in people talking at length about their own wacky misinterpretations of films, complaining about often projected ideological misalignments as if they were a measure of objective quality, and citing this cardboard box canon of film theory about how the characterization is inaccurate to the source material, or the editing felt wrong, or it would have been better matched the canonical ideal of a plot if events had happened differently and or in a different order. Let's take the Rotten Tomatoes summary of reviews of Suicide Squad. Suicide Squad boasts a talented cast and a little more humour than previous DCEU efforts, but they aren't enough to save the disappointing end result from a muddled plot, thinly written characters, and choppy directing. The cast are talented, the humour meter is up 2 degrees, but the plot is muddled, the characters are thinly written, and the directing is choppy. These are not meaningful turns of phrase. What does it mean materially to say a plot is muddled? How is the plot to, e.g. Primer, muddled? Maybe? Is that a mark against it in terms of quality? How does one thinly write a character? What would a thickly version of the same character look like? This is the language of the MMORPG character creation slider, not the language of critical analysis. It's not difficult to talk meaningfully about unusual turns in Suicide Squad. For instance, that the film has 2 introduction scenes for individual characters immediately before a scene that starts with an explanatory monologue. That's unusual.
It's pretty. But is it art?
There is a consensus around Suicide Squad that it is a laughably bad movie, bad in obvious, overwhelming ways, but even surface-level examination reveals elements that are not just good, but elements that are outright interesting. And so lots of people, you people, online people, do not properly appreciate Suicide Squad, which is a shame because you're genuinely missing out. I've rewatched this film once or twice while making this video, and I'm always surprised that it still immediately holds my attention. In context, later parts of the film reinforce earlier ones and vice versa. There's a lot going on, there's lots to pick up on, and there's lots that's interesting. So up front, I have to confess that I have my own working model for how Suicide Squad was originally conceived, although short of interviewing David Ayer himself, I'm never going to prove it. At least, this is how I'd personally rearrange it for best effect. It's a matter of record that the film was edited twice, once by Ayer et al. And once by the trailer-making company responsible for the Bohemian Rhapsody trailer. The final cut used was then a blending of these 2 cuts. This, amongst other things, explains why the soundtrack is such a curious mix of langorious classic rock anthems and trashy R&B smashers.
You wanna know my name, then go and tell the stars. You wanna know my gang, Suicide Squad.
It's hard to imagine there was a conscious decision to populate the film with both Purple Lamborghini and Fortunate Son. And if you compare the Suicide Squad soundtrack to that of Ayer's follow-up, Bright, again with Will Smith, it's clear which camp his boot was firmly placed in. So we know from the off that Suicide Squad has been rearranged by committee, and what we're getting is probably not the order that events were intended to be presented in. Specifically, I think the film has been linearized. Events start roughly at the beginning, and minus 1 or 2 Harley flashbacks, they proceed one after another chronologically until the end. Whereas my read on the scenes as they appear to be shot is that the layout was going to be something like this, where we start with the intro which flashes through the events of Batman v Superman and Waller describing her plan to the generals in the restaurant, and then follow on to maybe some brief introduction of the Crisis with Incubus underground, and then we lead straight into the squad being assembled outside the city, where we get essentially a first scene introduction for all of the characters. And then as they enter the city and move through, at that point in flashback we see the origin stories, which in the released film are at the start, and this proceeds up until they find Waller in the tower, at which point we get filled in on Waller's intentions, her pitch for the squad that was turned down, the fact that she is responsible for Enchantress, and essentially that she planned the whole thing. And then the squad have their drink, and we head into the finale, where presumably at the end Enchantress is supposed to die, because it is extremely strange that she does not in the released film. This provisional structure for me explains most of the curious choices in the film. The intense, colourful origin sequences in the past would break up the journey through the dark, murky cityscape in the present. One of my favourite scenes, where Deadshot and Harley consider the mannequin family display, would benefit greatly from being more proximate to the scenes where we see the non-normative family relationships that those characters represent or aspire to. Above that, this would remove the odd way in which the film plays its hand early in signalling which characters are going to be the most important, having given 4 or 5 of the characters lengthy origin stories. If poor old Slipknot gets the bite 10 minutes into the film before we've been given the lowdown on who Waller thinks is up to the task, then, that's just an excellent gag. We'd also sort out how Katana receives absolutely no mention for the first 30 minutes of the film, although I'll admit I have a soft spot for the way in which the film as released just goes, oh yeah, this ninja is coming too. Most significantly, the reveal that Enchantress is supposed to be a member of the squad rather than its antagonist would play as a twist, rather than just a lingering point of confusion. And Waller is cast as Master Manipulator, pulling strings left and right to both cover her own mistakes as well as get what she wants. Losing control of Enchantress becomes part of a larger scheme to require the assembly and intervention of the Suicide Squad. This handily explains why she might accidentally leave Incubus hanging out in her printer room. So, Suicide Squad is a film out of joint. So it goes. The order of plot elements is just one aspect of filmmaking, and while the infantile online culture of consuming cinema as art by repeatedly attempting to prove that we're better than it and would totally do better and make better art if it were us behind the camera might require us to throw the entire baby out with this bathwater, I want to say that it's okay to like movies even though parts of them are poorly made or incomplete or, were tampered with. You might call this a reaction to the I would simply school of film criticism. I like Suicide Squad as the assembled parts that make it up, even though there's a sense in which it isn't achieving its full potential. Almost any film will have some aspect that feels unresolved. Almost any art, full stop. What do I gain by not liking a film anyway? With all this in mind, let's take a look at a handful of microcosms within Suicide Squad itself for relations and reflections and interesting points of notice. I love the style of Suicide Squad, the costuming, the makeup, and most of the effects. The final big fractal thing is a little overplayed now, perhaps, but, it's for the most part, it's a cast of top actors smashing it, and, they're all entertaining to watch. There's a history that begins with Jon Favreau and Iron Man and ends, as it were, in profits. There was Iron Man 2 and Thor, and they were not quite as profitable, but then we start a swapping game where Jon Favreau becomes Joss Whedon and Edward Norton becomes Mark Ruffalo and Terrence Howard becomes Don Cheadle, and we keep making quiet swaps like this until eventually we reach Endgame and pretend that it all tied together into one coherent stream. The most elegant thing about this is how closely it matches real-world rewritings of history. But a victor is a victor, and to them the spoils. But like all beginnings of history, and especially beginnings in comics, there's more beginnings before and many more beginnings after. X-Men 2 proved for the first time that you could make a serious, mature superhero film only 5 years after Blade did it, and only 9 more years since Batman did it, and 11 more years since Superman did it. And Superman movies reached a dull, tacky end with X-Men 3 and Superman 4 and Blade Trinity, bound up in apologies for past mistakes. The jovial cynicism of a character like Ant-Man, as appears in Captain America Civil War, is drawn liberally from Hancock. Ang Lee's excellent Hulk takes a swing in 2003 and starts the Magic Marvel money-making mark without actually being invited, forcing itself as a pre-sequel to Incredible Hulk before that movie itself was relegated to characters and appearances only. And this web extends to the horizon. All modern films with duels owe a debt to the Star Wars prequels, and all modern films with wars have stolen liberally from Lord of the Rings. All the action films steal from Aliens, and all the biting political satires steal from RoboCop, except for RoboCop, which steals from iRobot. You might call it iRobocop. This is just part of how culture works. All this is to set the scene, as it were, for our object d'art, David Ayer's movie Suicide Squad. Marvel's bread and butter for years has been spinning successful films out of comic book sideshows who conventional wisdom regarded as the warm-up for the main act. Characters with zero name draw, terrible conception, or a pitiful lack of universal appeal, like the Guardians of the Galaxy, Ant-Man, or the interminable Captain America. In this instance patched over only by Chris Evans' portrayal of him as a man tortured by the prospect of having seen a Howard Zinn book on a bookstore shelf once. DC, on the other hand, had naught to show cinematically for most of the last 2 decades but Batman. The 2006 attempt to pivot Superman from being an 80s film about exploitative property ownership to being a post-9/11 film about exploitative property ownership had turned to dust in their hands. But Zack Snyder's Man of Steel, riding in 2013, is an essentially perfect movie, a gorgeous existentialist fable which mulls over the demand on man to construct his own morality, while effortlessly managing to sew in a complete alienation item by item of everything turbo-nerd fans of the Superman comic hold dear, and how they hate him for it, a hate that has only intensified as distance has revealed how properly prophetic the film is. But by the time of Suicide Squad, DC and Warner Brothers were flapping in the wind trying to recreate the endless money sluice of Marvel efforts. And the history of DC tie-in movies is a history of failure, with names such as Steel and Supergirl and Catwoman and Green Lantern and Jonah Hex remembered only as blemishes. This, plus the film falling into the hands of David Ayer, a director mostly known for producing crime dramas so down-to-earth that audiences emerged from cinemas with mouthfuls of topsoil. What he produced, courtesy of a cornucopia of big-name actors, is definitely idiosyncratic. It's got about as much in common with a Fig as it does Guardians of the Galaxy, its closest stablemate amongst the Marvel films, and the infuriating point of comparison for every bad video review. Where Guardians is a light-hearted jaunt amongst the stars with some brigands and their shared heart of gold, Suicide Squad is a film set in prisons. Physical prisons, metaphorical prisons, mental prisons, and the prison we call society.
What, we some kind of Suicide Squad? What, we some kind of...
What? This needs fleshing out.
What, we some kind of Suicide Squad? What, we some kind
What are we, some kind of Suicide Squad? The words hit the floor like a lead balloon, an ask too great even for the fated charisma of Will Smith.
What, we some kind of Suicide Squad?
What are we, some kind of Suicide Squad? As if the phrase were commonplace, universal. Oh, how's your new job? Some kind of Suicide Squad.
Suicide Squad. What, we some kind of Suicide Squad?
What are we, some kind of Suicide Squad? Like Deadshot has read and is referencing the comics. You know that comic, Suicide Squad? This is like that.
Suicide Squad. What, we some kind of Suicide Squad?
What are we, some kind of Suicide Squad? More or less than the other squads, you mean? By any measure, the squad comes out of the conflict with fewer losses than the military teams who go in with them, or the teams who are supposed to have gone in before.
What, we some kind of Suicide Squad?
What are we, some kind of Suicide Squad? A Suicide Squad is a squad which goes on suicidal missions.
What, we some kind of Suicide Squad?
What are we, some kind of Suicide Squad? It's the alliteration that does it, and the 1, 2, 3, 4 bounce of the syllables in the mouth. Pure comic book pulp. Laugh in the face of danger, squad. Live free or die hard, squad. You won't believe what happens on the next page.
Suicide Squad.
What are we, some kind of Suicide Squad? Comic books aren't just for kids anymore.
Suicide Squad.
What are we, some kind of Suicide Squad? Is this inappropriate?
What, we some kind of Suicide Squad?
What are we, some kind of Suicide Squad? It's been awkward describing this project to people, because to bring it up, you also have to kind of bring up the topic of suicide.
Suicide Squad.
What are we, some kind of Suicide Squad? The recently announced sequel to Suicide Squad is going to be called The Suicide Squad.
Suicide Squad.
What are we, some kind of definite article? What are we, some kind of The Suicide Squad?
What, we some kind of Suicide Squad?
And that is why I'm here.
Suicide Squad sits in a curious place where it doesn't really make any sense. Whether the film or the impressively sleazy Justice League Unlimited cartoon episode.
Expert. I know. I've seen the pictures.
Or the comics I couldn't be bothered reading for this review. No, just the very concept of taking a group of outlandish criminals with varyingly negligible talents and press-ganging them into service as a task force is the kind of thing which you can elide the sensibility of when it comes in a floppy pamphlet, but it's shaky ground, and it easily just translates into nonsense outside of the specific literary cruft that has built up around comics, that shifting morass of plates of canonicity freely sliding over one another, so that characters can simultaneously be heartless villains and empty caricatures and deft anti-heroes. In the comic world, much like in Dragon Ball Z, every monster is just a friend you haven't made yet, and vice versa. And this is to DC and Marvel's advantage, really. Well, what's the point of having all these toys in the chest if you aren't going to play with them? And that's the pseudo-tradition which Suicide Squad grows out of, alongside other fruity micro-dramas like Justice League International or The Thunderbolts, where writers take some existing characters out of the box and have them play out a little, amateur dramatics. There's an inherent plasticity to these character models which makes them open to this kind of inversion, which isn't necessarily shared with the mode of being an action movie protagonist. It's difficult to imagine someone conceiving a Die Hard sequel in which Hans Gruber is the protagonist, using his knowledge of FBI tactics to assist in solving crimes. Where action movies do practice subverting expectations, it tends to follow the model of either action movie heroes and their approach to things proving successful in unlikely scenarios, or else unlikely protagonists proving to be adept at taking on action movie hero strategies. Actual turns in action films tend to be weighty, over-signified things, like that jerk in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, who suddenly decides to defect to the USSR because of the unstoppable draw of the ideology of being a huge jerk.
Well, what can I say, Jonesy? I'm a capitalist.
Or Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver in Avengers Age of Ultron, who just sort of squat in the frame until they get recruited to be good guys, and they can't do anything. They might do something irredeemable in the audience's eyes, and then they won't have them as good guys. But the problem with dipping into such a mixed bag is that you get, a mixed bag, and translated into screen space, the Suicide Squad characters, who in comics are categorized as villains in much the same way that our categorization of people in real life as celebrities is more of like a loose family relationship than any specific tangible quality or status. You just villains, it covers everyone from like the Clock King to, some evil god of doom. Of the squad in the film, which consists of Harley Quinn and Deadshot and Killer Croc and Diablo and Captain Boomerang and Enchantress, all ably led by regular man Rick Flag, only Diablo, Croc and Enchantress have any particular talents at all. Deadshot's really good at shooting, I guess, and Captain Boomerang can fight his way out of this canvas bag.
Welcome to the party, Captain Boomerang.
And on top of that all, Amanda Waller, the hyper-competent Mandarin who's, in control of everything, is on the face of it an incompetent buffoon. She's a security expert with appalling home security who leaves powerful artifacts in her printer room. She's a master persuader and manipulator who immediately loses control of her only asset within seconds of a crisis. She can put a bomb in everyone else's head, but for Enchantress, she's got to use the cocktail sticks. On a cursory reading of the film, the squad's only given mission is to rescue Amanda Waller, not once, but twice. Although, just an aside, the only thing that actually bugs me about Amanda Waller is the moment where she sees these bubble-headed people, and she gets that look in her eyes that people get in the Alien films where they start talking about the military applications.
She takes an average person, a yoga mom, an elderly retiree, and she turns them into a soldier who can take a headshot and still fight. It's an instant army.
And these guys are just being mown down. They got bubbles for heads. What? They are not useful. Hey, who did that? Rewind that. Who's doing that? Who's firing those shots? I think one of the big questions that you got to answer if you want to understand Suicide Squad is who shot down this helicopter. The dust has settled out in the setup, and the squad are being sent in by Chopper on their top secret rescue mission. And they immediately get blown out of the air by like heavy gunfire. But the enemies they fight, the Jaggeroth from City of Death, they didn't do it. They don't have like gun placements. We see Incubus bring down some helicopters, but he does it with this boxing glove on a spring setup. This isn't that. But there is one helicopter we see get shot down by gunfire in Suicide Squad, and that's the Joker's helicopter at the climax of the skyscraper section of the film.
This bird is baked.
This bird is what? But yeah, the Joker's helicopter is shot down by Waller, who is in every way the prime antagonist in the film. I said I wouldn't talk about the plot, but if you're struggling with why events happen in the way they do, the answer is usually that Waller is a tactical wizard who planned it all. Just a quick exegesis of this scene. Waller, sleeping, summons Enchantress through her subconscious, and we see later in the film that Enchantress can read dreams and desires, and Waller wills her to take Incubus and set him loose in the city. We know that Waller wants this to happen because we know what Waller doesn't want to happen, which is for Enchantress to get the heart, and she stops that from happening. She has the proximity bomb box. She could have just put Incubus in there, but she's opted to permit this, and she's prepared for it by leaving Incubus in her printer room. And then once events are in motion, she has the option to destroy Enchantress's heart at any point, and opts not to. Her remaining in the tower block when she has, she's only 1 floor down. She could just head up to the roof and get out at any point, but she hangs around there for the squad to reach her, and you have to read that as intentional. Later in the film, it's implicitly suggested that Enchantress, even once she has her heart back, is unable to dispose of Waller. She doesn't kill her, she doesn't transmute her or harm her in any way. Waller dreams of an incident catastrophic enough to deploy her squad and justify her squad, and subconsciously or otherwise, she summons it. In the Rocky Horror Show, evil Dr. Frankenfurter has been indulging in the dark arts. Using only pluck, grit, and the set from a Hammer horror movie, he constructs not just a man, but the perfect man. In Altered States, evil Dr. Jessup has been indulging in dark psychology. By dunking himself repeatedly in a sensory deprivation tank, he's able to transcend physical form and become first a wolfman, then later a formless blob of pure energy. In real life, the CIA conducted experiments under the MK-Ultra program to identify, among other things, drugs which could increase the efficiency of mentation and perception. Wherever we look, evil doctors are pushing the bounds of human capability, and there is no difference in superhero movies. Take this scene from Captain America, where a villainous doctor and a villainous capitalist team up to reenact the Milgram experiment, where a voice casually advises them that nothing is wrong and to ignore the screaming of the man losing physical form in that sensory deprivation tank.
Demon! Shut it down! Demon! Shut it down! Kill the reactor, Mr. Stark! Turn it off! Kill it! Kill the reactor! No! Don't! I can do this!
The moment passes, and out he comes. It hasn't even taken 7 days and they've made him a man. But of course these aren't the villains, they're now the heroes. The party invested in the strictest eugenics of man have crept from being unambiguous villains and egomaniacs to being the heroic defenders of Western civilization. There is also a Nazi villain in Captain America obsessed with perfecting man, but he's doing it wrong? Suicide Squad has several of its own super soldier moments, and it explicitly calls out these references. Nodding to altered states, the Enchantress transformation turns the soldier in question not into a classical depiction of manhood, but into a nightmarish blob monster. The super soldier transformation is properly horrific in this way, and the film's primary villain Amanda Waller is on hand to offer commentary on the scene from the perspective of the military-industrial complex.
A yoga mom, an elderly retiree, and she turns him into a soldier who can take a headshot and still fight? It's an instant army.
Imagine the combat potential of that. But this isn't the first time we see altered states visually referenced in the film. El Diablo is introduced seated calmly in a deprivation tank that would make Dr. Jessup proud, and we're explicitly told that it fills with water. Waller's aim could not be more directly expressed over Diablo's subplot in the film. She has been attempting to transform him into something more beast than man, and failing. Through the application of the squad, through the application of friendship, by using the methods and motives we associate with heroism rather than villainy, she finally succeeds.
Oh, you think darkness is your ally? You merely adopted the dark. I was born in it.
My favourite bit in Suicide Squad is when Killer Croc drops this sweet Bane reference.
I live underground. Y'all are just tourists.
He's doing a bit. He's doing the Bane bit. What a champ. In The Dark Knight Rises, Bane's beatdown on Batman is a dramatic announcement that everything Batman is, Bane is superior to, more authentic, more effective, and everything Batman perceives as rightly his belongs to Bane, who is everybody. Nobody cared who he was, after all, until he put on the mask. And this duality, the perfect object versus the inherently flawed failure, is mirrored on all levels through Suicide Squad. Rick Flag is the perfect soldier versus Ike Barinholtz's snivelling coward. Bruce Wayne's attempt to play shadow government are infantile in contrast with Waller's machinations. Harley is more fearless and more dangerous than the Joker, because, as we see, left to his own devices, his shit is tiresome, mechanical, and often just fucking dull. Leto's Joker is at his most interesting when we see him through Harley's conception, ascended into this messed up John the Baptist diving into the tank to baptize her. When we see him cut off from her, he's this just goon laying out his knife collection to show off, or talking about grape soda, or getting the name Joker stenciled on his SWAT uniform. And then there's Deadshot's inverted Batman origin, where he's a single parent walking his daughter home down a dark alley when he's mugged, not by the faceless poor, but by an extra-legal agent of the state. And unlike that spineless hemophiliac Thomas Wayne, he fights back and successfully defends his family. He doesn't fail in this context because he's weak, but through yet another act of strength. And to add insult to injury, in the film's second best joke, the one true desire Enchantress offers him at the climax of the film is to replay this moment over again, throwing his coat at Batman and getting the shot off before anyone can intervene. He turns it down because, unlike Batman, Deadshot has an understanding and acceptance of the unfairness and imbalance in the world. Despite the material wealth he has acquired in his job as an assassin, he lacks the inbred hubris of Bruce Wayne to take a single personal tragedy as a cue to reshape the world in his own image. He's not up for spending the rest of his life making other people suffer because one-time circumstances were out of his control, and ultimately, while it doesn't help him live out a power fantasy, his actions secure him a relationship with his daughter. Unlike Batman, Deadshot can't afford a fixed, arbitrary moral code. An often repeated line about Suicide Squad, like we mentioned, is that people wish the film had focused more on the Joker and Harley Quinn, by which they mean they wished the film had focused more on Harley Quinn. They're just trying to get around that tragic law of international cinema, which makes it super illegal to have a solo female lead in a superhero movie. And while I disagree that her story needed fleshing out, it's all there on the screen to see, idiots. I think people are right to perceive Harley's story as being the primary mover in the plot, and her character expressing a significant degree of agency which the other members of the squad do not possess. Harley moves through the film with like a cartoony resilience, just lounging around with a baseball bat through scenarios which are essentially life or death for the other characters, up to and including bouncing off this building. But there's also more subtle moments, to the extent that this gaudy-ass film is ever subtle, where she gets a free pass, bypassing challenges which the other characters are forced to deal with. Here's the main example. Skyscrapers have a strong literary and cinematic heritage, and I'm not short of clip footage to slot in here to illustrate this. Tower blocks are purgatory. They're this bleak, symbolic punishment for attempting to live under capitalism, and it's no coincidence that we have reams of cultural depictions of skyscrapers as hellish war zones internally, in a way that they very rarely are in real life, primarily because they're in the habit of catching fire and falling over if that happens. We have a strong instinctual fear of skyscrapers, a primal knowledge, when within them that there are this multitudinous hidden ways working against us, working to our detriment. And all this is just to say that when we see our squad rocking up to a skyscraper in this movie, the subtext is clear. This will be a grind. You're going to have to fight your way up through the terraces of purgatory, earning your passage every step. But right here in Suicide Squad, ding! Harley just steps into a lift, and the logic of the film makes a half-hearted attempt to punish her for this, but the message is clear. Harley is operating outside the narrative of the rest of the squad, outside of this truth field which defines reality for the other squad members, and I think this has a lot to do with the way in which Harley mirrors the other big character in the film, Amanda Waller, who is in total control of the tower block throughout this sequence, remember. Like Harley, Waller is violent, unpredictable, amoral, and she's the sole female character adrift in a sea of dongs. They both get these scenes where they have to prove themselves worthy of attention to male authority figures through unconventional methods, which might backfire. When the squad reaches the top of the tower, there are 2 evacuation helicopters waiting, and one rescues Harley and one rescues Waller.
Stand by, I'll send another hero!
At the end of the film, they both walk free, relying on their alliance with extra-legal actors to avoid the punishment of the state. And in the same way that Waller's embodiment of state power protects her, Harley receives the same boon from her association with the Joker. These sequences actually ape one of the more popular in fandom aspects of the Joker's backstory, the idea that he has a multiple-choice origin. We're given 3 encounters between Harley and the Joker, which on one level are presented as continuous, but if you think about it, there's nothing really to support that outside of, films are linear. Any of these segments on their own would be a sufficient backstory for Harley. The 3 proposed origins also represent different power differentials between Harley and the Joker. In the hospital, she has institutional power over him, and then that is flipped into him having physical power over her. On the bridge, the relationship between them is less stark. She is pursuing him, he is rejecting her. And then in the paint factory, the relationship between them is, more equal. She is being inducted into his trust, and her participation, is an act of deference between equals. And then, Harley's deepest desire when Enchantress offers it at the climax of the film is domestic life with the Joker, again reflecting not only Harley's affection for the Joker, she envisions him as a caring husband, but also that Enchantress struggles with non-standard social relations. The Joker is not cured in the Vision because there is no conception of the Joker in which he can be cured. The same psychopathy just expresses itself as middle class rather than the explicitly lower class gaudy, tacky purples, hot greens. Harley whispers, "He married me," as if marriage itself were the difficult part of the Vision to achieve.
Is it Herbie?
Hey?
Herbie, this car. Oh, look at him.
Roger Rabbit. First and foremost amongst the film's images of self-destruction is Harley's jump into the paint tank, one of the film's more overt cinematic depictions, and one where the symbolism is fairly straightforward. Destruction of the self, sacrifice of the self, fall from grace, descent into hell, leap of faith. In the first Assassin's Creed game, the leap of faith is the peak cultiness of the assassin's movement. To become an assassin is symbolized through physical suffering, including the brutal detachment of your finger, and this act of spiritual sacrifice in which, in jumping, you place your life into the hands of the Assassin's Creed. As opposed to Assassin's Creed 2, which is a lot less ambiguous in how it depicts the assassins. They're pretty much just the good guys, and not this strange cult. Ezio's physical suffering is the torment of being hit in the face with a small stone, and ultimately his spiritual sacrifice consists of beating up the Pope. Now, in the Les Miserables movie, the climatic fall into the Seine corresponds with Javert's worldview falling in on itself. If the world is not set to the strict order he has held to his entire life, then reality, he judges, does not meet up to his standards, so he destroys it through destroying himself. Again, Hans Gruber's fall at the end of Die Hard, in which Diane unclips the watch given to her by Harry Ellis, is the total failure of the Hans Gruber worldview. Harry Ellis, sleazy, treacherous, ultimately motivated only by personal gains, is a less successful Hans Gruber. This motif of control and worldview is shared with Mama in Dread. There's an air of single combat in all of these, of power. In 1Q84, my all-time favourite touchstone for describing the fabric of reality, our Mame slips between worlds when she takes the emergency exit down from a raised highway, and what is a drop but the most emergency exit imaginable? In exciting young adult romp Divergence, there's a whole sequence of activities where the children, having worn the sorting hat, have to transgress all kinds of Central American anxieties, culminating in a leap from a rooftop, which is as notable for its safety and security. I mean, surely none of these children thought they were in any more danger than someone, attending Go Ape, as it is for the bait and switch which follows, where the pseudo-military order they're inducted into actually permits no transgressions whatsoever. Great falls often mean great ideological shifts. I really appreciated the way the chemical brew in the tank here is at once deep enough to dive into from height, and yet also shallow enough to stand in for a baptismal scene. Reality has changed in that fall, and while there has been cinematic continuity, the basic nature of objects and the relationships of the people around them has moved. And there is a second fall for Harley, of course, when she falls from the escape helicopter after it's shot down. But she does hit the ground running, and the character we see fall and, eat dirt is, naturally at this point, the point at which the heroes are banding together to defeat the villains, we see Waller suffer, whose ostentatious helicopter nosedive, I mean, why do they fire off all those flares? It seems almost designed to head off this moment of failure for the character. The other essential dichotomy which hangs over Suicide Squad, the one which is usually front and central in films which feature Batman, is the material and ideological contrast between Batman and what is in this case Jared Leto's hyper-materialist Joker. And, like how in the rest of the film the Joker is set up as a dark inversion of the military-industrial complex, this all follows through. Batman drives this ludicrous power fantasy car, and the Joker drives this ludicrous power fantasy car. They both have unlimited resources, unlimited reach, they both engage in extra-state violence and petty vendettas, and they're trapped Cold War style in an escalating conflict. The difference between them, especially in Suicide Squad, is essentially an aesthetic one, rather than, any particular ideology. And Suicide Squad is the first film to recognize, I think, the inherent triumph of the Joker over Batman, in the same way that Batman v Superman grapples with the idea that Batman is inherently fiercely reactionary. Suicide Squad really takes up this idea from the end of The Dark Knight, where the Heath Ledger Joker is hanging there and he says, we're gonna be doing this forever, you and me. And Christian Bale kicks him in the crotch or something. The point is that if Batman and the Joker are doing this forever, that pretty much suits the Joker. If they're both enabled by their privileged positions to operate on a basically supernatural level, where the Joker always knows exactly who to torture and Batman always knows exactly where to track him down to, the Joker's goal ends in being able to do as he will. Whereas Batman's goal, though he can do as he wills, is always to keep the Joker frozen in a certain position in stasis. Bruce Wayne devotes his fortune and business to the all-important task of producing a river you can step in twice. This is borne out hugely in The Dark Knight Rises, a film where Bruce Wayne invents free energy, a technology with unlimited radical potential, and pretty much shits himself over it, to the extent that he's clearly allied with these borderline radical green activists to develop it, and for all that he pretends like it's a freaking shock to find out that they're the League of Shadows, there must have been some signs. But faced with the possibility of the transformation of society, he recoils in horror, just at the principle of seeing change in the world, and becomes a recluse like the huge, useless dork he is. But in Nolan's Batman, the you and I scene with the Joker is tempered somewhat by how Nolan's Batman is always unsustainable. By the time of The Dark Knight Rises, he's lost all his knee cartilage and he's limping around Wayne Manor in the dark. Nolan takes pains to show that he literally couldn't keep on doing this forever, even if they had been able to bring the Joker back for another movie, both physically and politically, there is no option for Batman to continue. Even the sham consensus they've formed over Harvey Dent's dead body is contingent. It won't last. Ben Affleck Batman, however, in Batman v Superman, and in Suicide Squad, is much more stable in his reactionary moment, and correspondingly the Joker is too, where Ledger's Joker's almost, his supernatural powers of scheming are so freaking imminent that sometimes it's hard to imagine them persisting for longer than, just one night. Leto's Joker is basically an establishment man. He has his own cars, he has his own clubs, he has his own penthouse apartment. He's got his own Alfred. When Harley is separated from him, he has the resources to pursue her, above and beyond. It's hard to imagine Heath Ledger's Joker, pursuing in that sense.
Seriously, the hell's wrong with you people?
We're bad guys. It's what we do.
We're bad guys. It's what we do. I mean, is it? This sort of looting is more traditionally associated with societal unrest and oppression, the unconscious pressures of consumerism bubbling under people until, they snap in an orgy of consumerist expression. The coercion of death and the carrot of family life are, reflected in the storefronts to the members of the squad. Deadshot stands in front of motionless images of family life and daydreams of having a perfect mannequin family. When he talks to Flag, who offers him a deal, this image is what's reflected in his eyes. Harley, however, presented with the image of aspiration in the storefront window, approaches it the same way she approaches every adversary in the film. She applies force and takes what she wants. Flag can't understand this.
The hell's wrong with you people?
because Flag has literally never felt anything in his life. You know, we see a montage towards the beginning of the film of Flag's sexless Ken doll relationship with June Moon, and, you know, his not even eatable relationship with Waller is Jorah Mormont levels of pathetic. Rick Flag is just castrated. He sees orgiastic violence against property and blurts out, "What is wrong with you people?" You know, later in the film, he sees Waller just execute 2 people because it's convenient. He doesn't say, "What is wrong with you people?" then. You know, he's coercing the Suicide Squad into putting their lives in danger for no real reason. What is wrong with you people? This dream scenario of family life comes up again at the climax of the film, where the vision of life Enchantress offers to Harley is the fascinating 5-second clip of a domesticated Joker in the vein of Patrick Bateman. I mean, visibly even here, still psychotic, even though he's presiding over a 2.4-child nuclear family. It is explicitly the dream vision of capitalist society, and it is explicitly, you know, both here with Enchantress and here in the storefront and here in the real world, a trap. I didn't really want to spend the video responding or reacting to other people's criticism of Suicide Squad, partly because it'd be kind of crass, and partly because I don't really think much of it is interesting enough to deserve response. A whole lot of people wanting to dunk on Leto's Joker in a way that unmistakably tells on themselves, just IMO.
Or as the tabloids call him, Captain Boomerang.
But there is one thing I wanted to touch on specifically, which is the joke about Captain Boomerang and his pink unicorn fetish. The structure of the joke is this: Captain Boomerang's neon profile lists fetish, pink unicorn, leaving us to wonder what strange sexual hang-up the Captain has. Then the payoff is that once he's out in the field, we see that it is in fact a literal fetish, a physical unicorn plush that he takes comfort in retaining. Now, an unnamed YouTube reviewer who famously didn't understand the ending of Man of Steel has made the rather presumptuous claim that there is a third part to this joke, although it's by no means certain that jokes are meant to come in 3 parts, LOL. In the later scene, where Captain Boomerang is struck in the chest with a thrown knife, roundabouts where he keeps the unicorn, said YouTuber wants us to believe that the obvious thing to happen here is the unicorn, a soft plush, is supposed to have stopped the thrown knife. Seems odd, but okay. Then, when Captain Boomerang removes a large pile of money with a knife embedded in it, this is evidence that the film is doing a joke wrong. So, I mean, 2 things here. 1, someone getting hit in the chest with a knife and revealing that it instead struck a large pile of money is a decent self-contained gag, playing off the old Bible in the shirt pocket trope, which is clearly being referenced. 2, if you insist on seeing this as playing off the earlier joke, it does so capably. Captain Boomerang places a material object into his coat, but when it is removed, it has been transmuted into cold hard cash. You know, and under these circumstances, what he actually has is a commodity fetish. So, what do we even do with Suicide Squad? Even more so than when I started writing this review many moons ago, it is a film out of time and place. A companion piece to a solo Batman film that will never come, replaced in its own instance by a film with the same name and one extra definite article. The new film itself a pastiche that seems happy to draw on this film for casting and character even while implicitly insulting it. Suicide Squad is a film with its own orphaned sequel, which may or may not have its own follow-ups. People like, it seems, everything about Suicide Squad other than the film itself. Back when I started writing, the only constant was that Ayer himself would step up and defend his own artistic work, but as these little digs have taken hold, he's been more and more vocal about how he feels corporate interference spoiled his film, and it probably did. Even in this, Suicide Squad is a dark shadow to Justice League, the movie with its own cottage industry and campaigning for a recut. In any thread with more than 5 people demanding the Snyder Cut, you'll probably find at least one person saying, and also the Ayer Cut. The revelation that as originally planned, Justice League Steppenwolf would have played the secondary antagonist in this film too is darkly funny. All the promise in Suicide Squad might have been realised in the film itself. It might have been realised in sequels and tie-ins and cinematic universes, although the outlook there is less positive. Ultimately though, the promise in Suicide Squad is left beneath the surface, for us to scratch away at the dirt covering it with our own hands. For all that there is a contingent which mocks the class trimmings of Leto's Joker, there is also a large contingent of authentic fans, and time tends to mute contempt and amplify affection. There will probably never be a critical reassessment of Suicide Squad. The marks where it has been bent and dismantled are too apparent, too ready to hand, but it will surely have a lasting influence in terms of style, character, and ambition. But not for now. I spent 3 years writing this review. Suicide Squad is fascinating and unusual, and over. For now.
Of course, you're stepping into big shoes. Look, you work the way you work. I'll work the way I work. You can kiss my ass if you don't like it. That I'm talking to the public.
I love Suicide Squad. When I see scenes from it on TV or on YouTube, I genuinely get momentarily excited. I've spent 3 years casually dropping into conversations at work events, at parties, at weddings. Oh, I'm working on a review of Suicide Squad. The script is 10,000 plus words. Yes, a video review. Yes, it's going to be over an hour long. Of course I'll let you know when it's done. You'll have to try and stop me. People express alternately bafflement or interest. What is there to say about Suicide Squad? Well, I didn't know. I just started digging and I assumed the ideas would turn themselves up. Your job as editor, your job as reviewer is to form those ideas into a coherent statement, and that's where, more so than the movie itself, I've been unable to succeed. After 3 years, I'm content to cease waiting for lightning to strike in this regard. The film has lots to say, and with small consideration for how it's laid out, is genuinely fun to watch. This much I believe, it does not deserve to be the punchline of an increasingly tedious online consensus on what kind of mediocrity a good film should be. I'd watch Suicide Squad 100 times before I'd watch Avengers Infinity War again. But the task of laying out exactly why, in precise form with an introduction and a conclusion, is beyond me. Good luck to anyone who tries. What is in this video then is parts of an incomplete whole. I think they're interesting enough to release into the world regardless. I hope you agree. Personally, I'm looking forward to meeting people at parties or social events or weddings and saying, "Oh, the Suicide Squad review? Oh yeah, I finished that. It was fun."